Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night, so it's halacha and Tanya. I want to go through something that we just began last week, but it was mamish the last 3 minutes, so we didn't have a chance to discuss it properly. And that is the concept of, like what's called today, Cholov Yisroel, versus in halacha it's called Cholov Akum, which means a non-Jew, or as they call it today in many places, Cholov Stam. Now, again, I'm going to review it, but I want to go into more detail because it's a very important thing, especially in the Hasidic world. Many people today are lenient, and there's a lot to talk about. So, the Mishnah says that milk that was milked by a non-Jew and a Jew did not see the milking, so it's forbidden. You're not allowed to drink the milk. And we mentioned last week that sometimes when the rabbis made a decree, at the time they gave the decree, they gave the reason for it. Then sometimes if the reason doesn't apply, the decree doesn't apply. Certain takonas, certain decrees that Chachamim instituted, they said it without a reason. A year later, they gave out the reason why they made that particular decree. Then the halacha is that even if the reason doesn't apply, then the decree still stays, because when they gave out the decree, it was without a reason. That means there's no reason for it. Later on, they gave a reason that people should understand it a little bit. And Cholov Yisroel is one of those, so to speak, institutions that the decrees that they made, that a Jew must see the milking of the cow. Not only that, it says in halacha, a Jew has to be there at the beginning of the milking. Why does he have to be there at the beginning of the milking? Because he has to make sure. One second, we're going to get to dairy equipment. We're going to get into all those things in a few minutes. But a Jew has to be there at the beginning of the milking to make sure that the utensils that they're putting the milk into are really clean, that there's no non-kosher milk in there from before, because then it's a mixture of a kosher and non-kosher, and it would be an issue. In Shulchan Aruch, it also says, in Big Shulchan Aruch, that from non-Cholov Yisroel to Cholov Yisroel, you have to kosher your utensils. This is what it says in halacha. In other words, it's a rabbinic decree, which means rabbinically, the milk is not kosher, and therefore, if you cook that type of milk in utensils, so then the din is you need to kosher the utensils. That is the din as it is written in Shulchan Aruch. Recently, it's a long time already, some poskim said that if the reason is because it might mix in milk of a pig, or camel's milk, or a non-kosher animal, like we discussed last week. Any offshoot of a kosher animal is kosher, any offshoot of a non-kosher animal is not. So ostrich eggs are not kosher because an ostrich is not a kosher bird. Any caviar, like from sturgeon is not a kosher fish, so the expensive sturgeon caviar would not be kosher to eat because it's an offshoot of a non-kosher animal. The same thing applies to eggs. The same thing applies to milk. Milk of a kosher animal is kosher. Milk of a non-kosher animal is not kosher. That's the bottom line of it. So therefore, they said that nowadays where we have government regulations and there's a big hefty fine if somebody is not going to, if they're going to play games with that stuff, so then we can rely that it's not going to happen. Okay, so again, that's only valid in a place where there is government regulations, where there is a hefty fine. But in a country where there's no government regulations, then you can't, halachically, according to all opinions, you can't go to China and buy milk. Or you can't go to Europe and buy milk if there's no big fines and hefty, strong government supervision to make sure nothing else is being done. And again, that's only a leniency that Rabbi Moshe Feinstein made. Technically, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein wrote that's only when you cannot get kosher milk or people that are sick, and so on and so forth. Okay, this is the story of what it is now. But the way we hold, according to Hasidus, the Rebbe writes, it impurifies the mind. Drinking non-Cholov Yisroel milk impurifies the mind. Okay? It's B'tamar Chabad. There was an answer once from the Rebbe that somebody by mistake gave some kids non-Cholov Yisroel milk, and the Rebbe gave them a whole procedure that they need to do. They have to give tzedakah, $42, because Cholov, Cheslam Beis, I'm sorry, 40, because Cholov equals 40, and they should give $40 to tzedakah, and they'll be more careful, whatever it may be. So in our circles, we're very, very careful in Cholov Yisroel. Now, because we also mentioned that we need to kasher the utensils from non-Cholov Yisroel to Cholov Yisroel. So this is what we started discussing last week, that there's an argument in halacha. If something becomes treif in a certain degree, do you need to kasher it only at that degree? Or must you kasher it at boiling point, when it's bubbling, boiling? So in this practical case of the milk, and it's very relevant to the utensils, by the way, of what somebody is asking about, what's called DE, dairy equipment, and all these types of things. So we're going to discuss this now. But before that, I want to mention one more interesting shaila that's coming up today, which is also going to be a big issue according to many poskim. Nowadays, they have what's called cameras. So a guy doesn't have to be at the farm 4 o'clock in the morning to watch the milking. He could sit in his office, in his bedroom, with a camera watching the milking, the way they actually milk the cows. So the question is that called that a Jew is watching the milking? So that's a very big question in halacha. Is that called watching the milking because you're watching it through a movie? If you remember, we learned by many dinim, you can't hear the Megillah through Zoom. Okay, you can't hear Shofar. We can't have Zoom anyway on Yom Tov, but you can't listen to Megillah or Torah reading through Zoom. Why? Because you need to hear the original voice, and it's a mechanically reproduced voice. So now the question is like this. If a Jew watches the milking of the cow through cameras, is that called that they actually watched it? That's a big halachic issue that is being discussed now in the kashrus organization and the various different. I'm just bringing it up that that's an issue with that, because a lot of people who say Cholov Yisroel is really not a mandatory halacha today. It's only a chumrah, it's only a strictness. So there would be more lenient with kavers than a person that holds no, that's actually not kosher, and you need to drink only Cholov Yisroel. That's besides the fact, this is a side note on this, that a lot of milks add vitamins to it. And then the question is it a kosher vitamin, not kosher vitamins, the vitamins are mixing in and all that. So now let's come back to the kashering of utensils, because this is very important. Now, normally when you kosher utensils, number one, it has to wait 24 hours. We learned this by Pesach. If you kosher with a blowtorch, you kosher with direct heat, you don't need 24 hours. Okay? You could do it right away. You finish using the oven, you can self-clean it right away. But when you kosher with hot water, because hot water is not destroying what's forbidden in it, it's removing it. So therefore, the halacha is you need to wait 24 hours prior to the time you want to kasher. Okay, that's issue number one. So now if you're going to a non-kosher dairy and you want to make a run of Cholov Yisroel, the question is then you're going to have to kasher the pasteurizer, because the pasteurizer gets up to 180 degrees, which is very hot. And we said from non-Cholov Yisroel to Cholov Yisroel, you need to kosher the utensils. So if this farm used milk that was not Cholov Yisroel, and they ran, and it was kashered at 180 degrees, pasteurized at 180 degrees, so this pasteurizer now is not kosher officially if you keep Cholov Yisroel. So they need to kasher it. So now the question is like this. Number one, you need 24 hours and no milking. Because if the pasteurizer is being used within 24 hours, you have a halachic issue. Okay, with some plants have a leniency, they put chemicals that make it smell and make it pogum blemish, a blemish taste, and they're lenient with that. Not everybody is. But then you have another issue. Okay, number one, you need to make sure they're not milking or using the pasteurizer, no milking for 24 hours. Okay, otherwise you don't have 24 hours before you kosher the pasteurizer. Secondly, something over 110 degrees from Fahrenheit becomes treif. Yatzel lettuce base called cooking. To kosher it, now the question is in halacha, do I have to kosher it at 180 degrees? Or do I have to kosher it at what's called 212 degrees, which again is the level of cooking, okay, at sea level. That's known as 212, which means when water actually begins to bubble a lot. So now the question is, this pasteurizer became treif at 180 degrees. So do I can kosher it by just running a hot water cycle through the pasteurizer at 180 degrees? Then it would kosher it. But if you hold that that's not enough of a koshering, you hold that it has to get up to 212 degrees. So then you have a problem with the pasteurizer because not all pasteurizers are made that they can get heated up to 212 degrees. So a lot of times they have to have the engineers over there add pieces of material, mechanical things that it should be able to get up to 212 degrees. Okay? So again, if you're talking about a farm that's not completely Cholov Yisroel, there are a few farms in America that are only Cholov Yisroel. That's it. They don't 24/7 is Cholov Yisroel. Okay, but if you don't have that, and you have that, you go to a non-kosher dairy and you kosher it. So number one, you have an issue with 24 hours prior to the time you want to kosher it. Secondly, you have an issue of koshering it. What degree can you kosher? Okay. So let's say those things are taken care of. So then now you can have a proper Cholov Yisrael milk because, again, it was 212, it was Eina Ben Yemei 24 hours, and now you're able to have that milk. Now, sometimes you have, and this is a general kashrus issue, you have something that's called DE. They're stopping it, by the way. If you notice, you don't find too many DEs anymore. DE means as follows. It's a power product made on dairy equipment. DE means dairy equipment. So in other words, it's a complete parva ice cream, let's say, but it's made DE on dairy equipment. So it means as follows. If you keep Cholov Yisrael and you hold that you have to kosher the utensils, so they don't. They'll make a parv run on a dairy equipment, which is not Cholov Yisrael. Halachically, it's really parv, but by the way, if it's DE, you cannot eat that product mamish together with meat. You could eat it right before meat, right after meat, but you can't eat it with the meat. To give you an example, a lot of the parva creamers that are out there that have OU, and they'll write OUDE, or they used to. So now, if you keep Cholov Yisrael, you can't use it because they don't kosher the equipment. That's clear. What happens if you don't keep Cholov Yisrael and you drink regular milk, but it says DE? So what's the halacha? So I'll tell you very simple. I mean, I'm not saying this is what you should do, but let's say you're drinking a cup of coffee together with your meat. You're eating meat and you're drinking coffee, parva coffee with the meat. But this is really parva creamer, but it's DE, meaning the ingredients are parva, but it's made on dairy equipment. So the then is you can eat it right before meat, right after meat, but you cannot eat it together with meat. Okay? So again, if you see a product that has DE, the fact is, if you keep Cholov Yisrael, you cannot eat that product at all. If you don't keep Cholov Yisrael, meaning you drink the regular milk, so then the din is that you cannot eat it together with the meat, or you can eat it right before or right after, but you cannot eat it together with the meat. So this is the big issue. Now there's another very big issue also. A lot of chocolate is made with milk powder, not with milk. It's made with milk powder. Okay, what they do is they extract the water from the milk and they make the milk into a powder, and then when they want to drink it, they add more water to it. Like we learned with the concentrated juices, they take out the water, then when they want to make it into juice, they add the water. So there are opinions that say that doesn't have to be Cholov Yisrael. Why doesn't it have to be Cholov Yisrael? Because if it's straight from milk, it won't congeal. It won't be able to be made cheese out of it or this type of powdered milk out of it. You wouldn't be able to make powdered milk. A lot of other opinions, and this is the way we hold, that powdered milk must also be Cholov Yisrael. And if it's not Cholov Yisrael, then you can't eat it. Therefore, when somebody buys chocolate, they need to make sure there's a very good hechsher on it, if it's dairy. Why? Because a lot of kashrus organizations rely on the leniency that powdered milk doesn't have to be Cholov Yisrael. Because you can't make pig's milk into powdered milk or things like that, whatever the details are. So then you have an issue of things that come from powdered milk. And you don't know. Not all companies right. So then you would have to rely actually on a very good hechsher that you know is not relying on the leniency of powdered milk to be able to use that powdered milk to make chocolate that they're calling Cholov Yisrael. Okay, so that is, generally speaking, this din of Cholov Yisrael and Cholov not Cholov Yisrael. We are very strict on Cholov Yisrael, that it has to be only Cholov Yisrael, even in America where there's the leniency that we said before. But again, people must keep in mind that whole leniency about not having to drink Cholov Yisrael is only in America or places where there's strict government regulations with hefty fines. Then those opinions say you can rely on it. And again, we don't actually rely on it. There are certain people, again, today we're not lenient on it, but there are certain people that said butter doesn't have to be Cholov Yisrael, because butter, you can't make butter from pig's milk or camel milk or non-kosher milk. So again, our minig is that we don't eat it, even butter, because first it was made into milk, and then it becomes forbidden. Another thing has to be also with the concept of cheeses. There is a concept of cheese that are going made, but this again, cheese that's Cholov Yisrael, that has a good hechsher, but that's not a problem with the people buying that cheese if it's Cholov Yisrael and it has a valid hechsher. Okay, that's generally speaking all about Cholov Yisrael. I mean, there's a lot, we could talk about this for years. But that's generally the general concept of non-Cholov Yisrael versus Cholov Yisrael. Pas palta, like we learned, bread that was baked by a baker, there's a leniency. If it's cheaper, it's better. Then you can, but again, in our circles, we try to be strict that we only have, especially today, you can get Pas Yisrael. And you have to make sure, by the way, again, just in that, going back to that din that we learned last week also, that just because there is an OU or an OK on a particular bread or cookie does not mean in any way for sure that it's Pas Yisrael. It might not be Pas Yisrael. We give a hechsher because it's pas palta, it's a bread of a bakery, that there are leniencies, because we learned that you can't, a guy who bakes you bread, even though everything is kosher, you can't eat it because the Chacham didn't want this intermingling. But if it's a baker that's not making for anybody in particular, he's making for the masses, and he doesn't know who's buying it, and he has no connection to the people that are buying it. So then that would be that din. Okay, that finishes these dinim. Now we're going to go into a new din of washing before bread. Okay, so again, the question was, is it written dairy equipment, is it forbidden? More and more, by the way, more and more the OU and the OK are, you see, there's less DEs now. A lot of times they'll just, the OU and the OK will just leave it OUD and just leave it at that. They won't get into any other details. Okay, next din here in Shulchan Aruch is the din of washing for bread. Everybody knows you wash for bread, but they're unaware of a lot of details in the din of washing for bread. Okay. Now, any amount of bread that somebody eats, they have to wash for hametz. Okay. The only time, and this is a very important din, a lot of people are unaware of, and they might be making the bracha in vain. The only time halacha says you make a bracha of al netilas yadayim is when you're eating what's called in Hebrew kibetza, which is 2 ounces of bread. If you're eating 2 ounces of bread, then you have to wash and make al netilas yadayim. If you're eating less than 2 ounces of bread, I'll give you an example. In practical language, if you have a normal rye bread, a normal slice of rye bread, a normal average size of a rye bread, you can assume is 1 ounce. A slice of rye bread, you can assume approximately is 1 ounce. So if somebody knows you're going to be eating a sandwich, 2 pieces of bread, so then it's a kibetza that's 2 ounces, then there's no question you have to wash and make al netilas yadayim, and so on and so forth. What happens if you're not going to be eating 2 ounces of bread? I know I'm having 1 slice of bread. The din is you have to wash on it. Now netilas yadayim. But you don't make the bracha of al netilas yadayim. The only time you can make a bracha is when you have a kibetza, a kibetza, which is 2 ounces. Less is not proper. You're not yetzer. You don't make a bracha. And if you do, it's a bracha in vain, actually. Okay, now washing for bread is has to be done in a particular way. Number one, netilas yadayim has to be from a vessel. It has to be a vessel, and it has to be a vessel that's complete. A vessel that's cracked, or holes in it, or cracks in it that go through and through, you're not allowed to wash with that keli. It's not a kosher vessel to wash for netilas yadayim. So it cannot be a broken vessel, a cracked vessel. So another type of important thing is that if you're washing for bread, you can't wash from a soda bottle, which has a very thin neck to it. Why can't you wash from a soda bottle? Because the water doesn't come out in one shot. It comes out very slowly. When you wash for bread, you have to be able to cover the whole hand up to the wrist with 1 pour of water. You can't pour a little bit. Okay, you have to pour and up to the wrist in 1 pour. A soda bottle would not be able to do that. So a soda bottle, even though it's a complete vessel, but it's still not something which is kosher because it's not going to pour out enough. Another thing is a vessel that was made to stand on its own, and now it broke at the bottom, not in the actual utensil part, but it's not able to stand by itself, you're not allowed to use it for netilas yadayim also. Okay. Now the Gemara also says a lot of dinim about washing for bread. The Gemara says, "Kol hamezalzel b'netilas yadayim," whoever is not meticulous in washing for bread will come to poverty. In fact, it's an interesting thing. The Mefarshim say the bracha al netilas yadayim, al netilas yadayim. The first word of those three words is ayin, nun, yod, al netilas yodayim, which is an acronym for the word ani, which means poor. So even though netilas yodayim is of a rabbinic nature, rabbinic decree, nevertheless, you have to be meticulously careful in washing for bread. Now, how much water do you have to pour on one hand? Okay, you have to pour a whole, what's called a revius of wine, which is revius of water, which is a minimum of 3 ounces of water. Now we're going to soon learn how the processes of washing for netilas yadayim. Okay, but before I go into that, because I want to spend more time on that. So when you wash your hands, fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush, you have to eat kazayis, beitza. To be yaitze kiddush b'makom seudah, to be yaitze kiddush in the place of a meal, you don't need to eat a kabetza of cake or meitzi. You have to eat only a kazayis. But again, if you're eating bread, then you have to wash, but you cannot make on just your dime unless you're planning to eat 2 ounces. But that's a different thing. Suda Shabbos itself needs a kabetza, 2 ounces, but for kiddush, 1 ounce is enough. But we'll learn when we get to the din of kiddush. Okay, so now the Gemara says it has to be a lot of hands. Rav Chiston, the Gemara said, I fill a whole barrel, a mini barrel of water. Don't forget, they didn't have running water. He used to go to the well and schlep. Because every time he washed, he used a lot of water to be able to wash netilas yadayim. Al netilas yadayim is a very important thing. It's a very important thing. People are very lenient. You go to functions, people sit down, the bar mitzvahs, weddings, banquets, whatever. They'll just sit down, they'll eat bread. It's very, very important that you have to wash for bread. In fact, there is an interesting halachic question, which we discussed in show once. Am I allowed to give bread to somebody that I know will not wash on it? And there's a big question in halacha if I'm allowed to. Because I'm causing somebody to do an aveda, even though it's rabbinic, but I'm causing somebody to do an aveda that he's not going to be washing for bread. So we'll discuss that next time, but because I want to go to Tanya now. But the din is you have to be meticulously careful until Sedayim and Mitzvah. Next week we will continue that. Now we're going to go to Tanya.